Thank you for joining Wars of the Rosies as we continue with part 3 of a world journey within the King's Chamber by the Imperator AMORC. An article taken from Rosicrucian Digest, Volume 32, Number 3, March 1954. The Thought of the Month within the King's Chamber by the Imperator AMORC. This article is the third of a series being written by the Imperator after his return from a world journey in behalf of the Rosicrucian Order. Editor. Tradition relates that candidates were originally required to take a solemn oath before an altar located between the paws of the Great Sphinx. The altar that is seen there today, however, is not the one that must have existed at that time. From thence, the candidate was led by a subterranean passageway into the Great Pyramid proper. That subterranean passageways existed, and there are vestiges of their entrances off the Grand Gallery of the pyramid, is admitted by modern excavators. Though no complete subterranean passageway has as yet been found, preliminary rites were conferred upon the candidates in the lower area of the pyramid. It was only when the candidate had advanced beyond the Tyro stage that he was permitted to ascend to the higher chambers, each chamber constituting a plane of advancement, on the highest being the Hall of Illumination or the King's Chamber. Under analysis, all of the mystery school's initiatory rites are found to consist of 4 principal elements. There is every reason to believe, as tradition relates, that these historical rites were likewise performed in the King's Chamber. The first of these is the Rite of Separation. We can visualize the candidate ascending the huge Grand Gallery, cautiously walking with the traditional blindfold over his eyes, led by priests and acolytes holding aloft their torches. The flickering light, produced by drafts from the ventilation passageways, cause grotesque shadows of the processional to be cast upon the granite walls. Behind the priest came the chanters and scribes, and then still other subalterns carrying the sacred appurtenances. Just before the King's Chamber is reached, the processional halts. A gentle restraint upon the candidate's arm caused him to stop. His heart is perhaps pounding in excitement and in the expectation of the momentous occasion, the greatest in his life, a dream to be fulfilled. Perhaps always he has trepidation as to his worthiness to be accepted into the final degree. What tests and what trials, what ordeals await him? Will he show cowardice, or will the great God be his companion and support him in his test? Before him is a huge granite block, constituting a plug which closes the passageway, except for a narrow opening about 4 feet in height and barely allowing the entrance of a person when in stoop position. The Karihab, or high priest, requests that the candidate stoop, and he is reminded to bow his head. Shuffling through the tunnel-like passage, he feels his way in the darkness as he goes. Midway, he is requested to halt and to rise his right hand directly above his head. Slowly he does so, and, to his surprise, there is an aperture directly above him as a narrow shaft. With further instructions, his hand is guided to an obstruction against one side of the top of the shaft. Clasping it, he finds that it conveniently fits his hand. The priest then informs him that this is the cubic inch of the pyramid builders, a secret key to its mathematical symbolism. In his crouched position, the candidate listens intently to the charge of the sages as they further relate the mysteries of the day. Upon command, the candidate resumes his crawl of the remaining few feet through the passage. He is then to a standing position within the King's Chambers, whose interior is as yet concealed from him. He hears a slight scuffling of soft-soled feet upon stone, and then strong but gentle hands lift him to a supine position. Thence he is solemnly carried and lowered to a hard surface. Muffled voices around him have now acquired a sonorous tone, but are not yet comprehensible to him. Myriads of questions must have flooded the consciousness of the candidate. Where is he? Why is he laid in a recumbent position? To add to the mystery and to incorporate an element of terror, hands now reach down and take his arms and cross them over his chest, in the manner of the dead being prepared for burial by the embalmers. Beads of cold perspiration break out on his brow as deep and melodious voices softly chant a funeral dirge. Seconds seem an eternity when finally fingers touch his brow and remove the blindfold, fearing to move or even what he might see. For a moment he hesitates to open his eyes. Then boldly he looks upward. Above him is a dark, seamless monolith of granite. Shadows dance upon it as torches he cannot see, partly illuminated. He glances to his left and then to his right. Again, terror strikes his heart. His fingers steal out from his tensed fist, and he touches the cold sides of the stone sarcophagus. He is in a coffin. 4 sacred rites. A priest, with all the majesty and solemnity of his office, and with regalia symbolic of the power vested in him, stands before the foot of the sarcophagus, gazing down on the recumbent candidate. He relates to him the significance of this, the rite of separation. He tells the candidate that the precepts that have been previously taught him have elevated his consciousness, that he has thus undergone a transition, not of the body but of the spirit. He is now as one who has departed the earthly life. He is to leave behind him the old order of his thinking and his living. He is to cast into the abyss of ignorance his false thinking. For that which was the former self is now dead. With a final charge, but still another presage, the candidate is then raised from the sarcophagus. From these shadows comes forth still another carry head, who girds the candidate with appropriate regalia, vesting him symbolically with new life. He is born again, not from the womb of woman, but of illumined mind. Thus begins the rite of rebirth, which has played so prominent a part in all the ceremonies of the great religions, inheriting many of the concepts of the Egyptian mystery schools. What this new life and its obligations should mean to the candidate must be indelibly imprinted upon his mind. In each of his previous initiations, profound principles concerning these things had been revealed to him. These must be easily recalled if they are to guide him in an exemplary life. Signs and objects as symbols must reveal the great truths, simply and forcefully. Then the candidate was introduced to the rite of exposition. One by one the priests and acolytes filed by to stand a moment before him and to reveal objects and make signs, each of which taught a lesson. Another held a torch close, so that all could be clearly seen. As an acolyte read from a scroll the sacerdotal and philosophical import of each exhibit. In our mind's eye, we can see the candidate standing attentively, his eyes sparkling with excitement and reflecting the flame of the torch held close to his face. As each symbolic object is finally described, he places his left hand over his heart, then bringing the tips of his thumb and the first 2 fingers of his right hand together, he touches the object before him, and then his forehead, and finally the hand over his heart. He thus signifies to the stages and the reverent audience about him that he has implanted the meaning of the exhibits in his mind, and that he has further pledged the wholeness of his being to protect and to cherish what he has learned. The candidate, lighted by torches, is now led within a few feet from the low passageway through which he entered the king's chamber. A Carry-Heb steps forward and elucidates why the low passage was constructed between the high grand gallery and the king's chamber. Men of all stations of life have been introduced to the mysteries, he explains. Potentates, pharaohs, sages, and princely merchants, no matter what their rank and fame in the world, before entering the Holy of Holies, this hall of illumination where the final rites are to be conferred, they must divest themselves of all signs of such worldly distinction. Each must enter the chamber as a simple and contrite soul, significant of the necessary humble demeanor which one must have. He must bow his head to enter, it being a physical impossibility for one to walk erect through the passageway and enter the grand gallery in that manner. Likewise, in re-entering the world of men, after being reborn into the life of illumination, one departs from the king's chamber, not with vain pride of accomplishment, nor with the arrogance of abused power. He leaves with the realization of his responsibility to mankind, the need to disseminate the truth he has learned by a course of practical service. So, like a humble servant approaching a master, he bows again as he enters the world to resume his duties. What his duty shall be is read to him by a scribe from a prepared scroll. Then, with the resounding in his ears of the chanting of the assembly within the king's chamber, he bows and departs through the passageway to the grand gallery, and thence makes his descent to the desert floor. This constitutes the final rite of re-entry. These thoughts and the old age traditions were foremost in our minds as solemnly the Rosicrucian assembly slowly climbs the ascending passageway to the Hall of Illumination, high within the Great Pyramid. Through the cooperation of the Egyptian government, the Rosicrucian order had been given exclusive use of this chamber in the Great Pyramid for its ceremonial. The Grand Master of Amenhotep Lodge of Egypt, Frater Saad, stood at the ancient entrance to the pyramid, as had the high priest of old, and determined whether all who entered were active fraters and soras. The Imperator, the Grand Treasurer, Frater Whitcomb, the Grand Counselor Ezel, and other distinguished officer and members, each in turn, made their entrance through the low passageway. Almost all touched the superimposed relief of the cubic inch in the little shaft above their heads as they made their entry. Each, too, had commented upon the exhilaratory sensations they had as they touched the stone. It was not alone the realization of its symbolic significance as the key to the prophetic measurements of the pyramid which thrilled them. They knew that for many centuries, dating into remote antiquity, men and women of noble pursuit, with hearts of sincerity and with minds open to the light of wisdom, had likewise touched this stone. Had each of these in the past imparted something from his own aura to the mass of that stone? Could it have been impregnated with a subtle energy which it could radiate and which could be perceived by all those whose psychic perceptions were capable of its detection? An age-old ceremony. Once assembled within the king's chambers, all fraters and soras were oriented against its rectangular walls. The imperator, standing behind the great sarcophagus, faced the assembly, who were in a large formation. He wore the ritualistic regalia of his office. He then expounded in brief the history of the Great Pyramid, as known to the mundane world, and its mystical traditions as well. A simple Rosicrucian ritual was performed, which we are not at liberty to disclose here, but which is familiar to members of Rosicrucian chapters and lodges throughout the world. A special time of meditation had been proclaimed weeks in advance in Rosicrucian publications, having a worldwide circulation. Rosicrucians and all those sincerely interested in the great event were asked to participate at a time in their locality corresponding to the precise time of the pyramid meditation. Thousands of Rosicrucians and mystics in every land focused their thought at that time upon the Great Pyramid, on this historic day of prophecy, and the assembly of Rosicrucians in the king's chamber. The Rosicrucian Order, AMORC, was the only esoteric order or fraternity in the world represented on the occasion, as it had also been in 1936. Sacred and traditional vows of great meaning to members and to those having a knowledge of mystical principles were entombed. These sounds reverberated throughout the great stone chamber like tremendous claps of thunder pealing down from a vast mountain. The excellent masonry, the perfect joining of each block of granite, caused the chamber to constitute a tremendous sounding board. The accumulating vibrations were amplified as they sped across ceiling, floor, and walls in every direction. Though the volume and intensity might thus be physically explained, it was also as the age-old intonations had sympathetically become in resonance with the vibratory harmony of the molecular mass of the whole pyramid itself. It was as though the very atoms of the structure had entered into a rhythmic dance of release. The pyramid seemed attuned to the very notes which were intuned, and the whole was vibrating in harmony with the vowels. The effect upon those present was not merely of a magnitude of sound, but also of a startling impact upon the solar plexus. The vibrations released by the intonation were obviously reaching downward into the octave of touch. Those sensations were had with such force that one felt as though a pressure were being exerted on various parts of the body. The psychic and emotional response, the result of the stimulation of certain of the psychic centers, was almost an unforgettable experience. Solemnly down the grand gallery the candidates departed at the conclusion of the ceremony, each one lost in the profundity of his own thoughts, invoked by the experience. Each one made his re-entry into the world, truly in no small degree having, like the candidates of old, been reborn in consciousness. Thank you for watching, and please don't forget to share, like, subscribe, and comment. And if you can, please consider donating to Wars of the Rosies. Links to PayPal and Patreon are in the description. Thank you so very much.